Episode of Saturday Storytime with Kevin and Ty. Different setup tonight in a different camera angle, if you can tell. So tonight at Papillon Blonde underscore suggested to read How to Change Your Mind. What the New Science of Psychedelics Teaches Us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence by Michael Pollan. If you know Michael Pollan, you will know he's a legend. He's an investigative journalist, one of like the OGs. He worked for like New York Times or the New Yorker. Written a lot of amazing books around kind of ethical issues. One of his biggest ones was called The Omnivore's Dilemma. Anyways, his latest book, he's this like white dude in his 70s, like really just genuine looking dude. I think he's from like the East Coast in the US. But he wrote a book on the history of psychedelics. And he's an investigative journalist. So like all investigative journalists, they kind of just get their hands dirty. They dive into whatever they're investigating. So this dude in his 70s tries different psychedelics for the first time. So this book is very special to me. And I didn't know who Michael Pollan was until 3 years ago. I was taking a break from med school and I drove across the US from Atlantic Canada to Vancouver, to the west coast of Canada, going through mostly the States. And when I was going through Boulder, Colorado, I was going through this really cool bookstore. And the bookstore had this little flyer and bulletin boards all over saying different book events. And I was there, I think, in July of 2018, 2017, the summer. And there's a book event for this book, How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. No idea who Michael Pollan was. I saw the book cover, it looked kind of mediocre, but then I read the subtext and stuff, and I'm like, damn, that's cool. So I just went to the front counter and I bought a ticket to the book event. So the book event was an event with Michael Pollan. So you go to this pre-Bisterian church in Boulder, Colorado. And Michael Pollan was there to talk about his book in this 2-story beautiful church. And you got to pick up your copy, your hardcover copy of the book there. And at the end of the book event, after him, he talked about it for about an hour in this beautiful church. And surprisingly, but not too surprisingly now that I thought about it, most of the people there were like in their 60s and 70s. They were people that grew up in the 70s, 80s, and they were probably in their 20s, 30s as hippies, even probably late teens. So a lot of 70-year-old, 60-year-old were at the book event. And I actually got my book signed. Yeah, I'll dive into the reading pretty soon. But I got my book signed by Michael Pollan. I went up to him and he actually signed it for me. I'm sorry, Ty. Oh, Ty. So I got it signed, which is really cool. And didn't really get to talk to him too much because like it was just a big long lineup of people wanting to get like a signature. Basically you got in line and you actually wrote out what you wanted him to sign into the book. Oh, right. Because I was trying to find a sticky note of where he signed it, but I forgot he just signed the book. So I got him to sign for Kevin. May you, let me try to remember now. May your journey, may your something be safe. Oh, for Kevin, may you have a safe and worldly journey, right? Yeah, may you have a safe and worldly journey, Michael Pollan. That's why I kind of asked him to sign. I don't know. I thought at the time it was pretty cool. Okay, so this book is about the history of the psychedelic movement, the big key players in it, where the psychedelics movement and stuff now is with the latest research, like the MAPS project, based in California. A lot of cool political changes and also research, specifically looking into for treating and helping with mental health. Really cool. So I wanted to read to you the section It's chapter 5, The Neuroscience, Your Brain on Psychedelics. So this is later on in the book, about like 3/4 in. And the first half is about the history of psychedelics, the big key players, and then the latter half of the book is about Michael Pollan meeting up with these different like scientists and experienced like trippers, and he actually tries mushrooms, LSD. He tries five meo DMT, which is like ayahuasca or a DMT, but like the next level. It's like toad venom, and people that have tried it. I haven't tried it. People that have used it, smoke the toad venom, the five meo DMT, say they just dissolve into one consciousness, and it's this very spiritual, mystical experience, and it happens like quickly, and it's over quickly, but it changes your perspective. So what just happened in my brain? A molecule had launched me on each of these trips, and I returned from my travels intensely curious to learn what the chemistry could tell me about consciousness and what that might reveal about the brain's relationship to the mind. How do you get from the ingestion of a compound created by a fungus or a toad or a human chemist to a novel state of consciousness with a power to change one's perspective on things, not just during the journey, but long after the molecules have left the body? So this is in the book when he did a trip on 5 DMT, 5-MeO DMT, the toad venom, and that is probably what I would say, like from my knowledge, one of the most intense psychedelics you can go. It's almost like looking at common social drugs. Say like of like cigarettes and alcohol and weed. That's on the chill end of the spectrum, and then intense end you might be thinking of like heroin, crack, LSD, mushrooms. So yeah, it's more on like the crack and the heroin, LSD, mushroom spectrum of like the intense drug experience. So yeah, Michael Pollan does not mess around. And he's a 70-year old. Just Google Michael Pollan, and he's a 70-year-old white dude. He's awesome. Actually, there were 3 different molecules in question. Psilocin, which is mushrooms, LSD, and 5-MeO DMT, the toad venom. But even a casual glance at their structures, and I say this as someone who earned a D in high school chemistry, a tryptamine is a type of organic compound, an indole to be exact, distinguished by the presence of 2 linked rings, one of them with 6 atoms and the other with 5. Living nature is awash in tryptamines, which show up in plants, fungus, and animals, where they typically act as signaling molecules between cells. The most famous tryptamine in the human body is the neurotransmitter serotonin. I love serotonin. The chemical name of which is 5-hydroxytryptamine. It is no coincidence that this molecule has a strong family resemblance with the psychedelic molecules. Interesting. So serotonin, natural human neurotransmitter that we make in our brains and lots in our guts. It's kind of the dreaming one, the one that makes us kind of feel good and emotional. And when you smoke weed, that kind of induces it. When you eat tasty foods, induces it. And certain psychedelic drugs that induces releases of serotonin, natural chemicals that we make. Everyone makes it. You make serotonin. You're making serotonin right now. And if you're in maybe a good mood, you're making your serotonin's pretty poppin', so keep it up. Serotonin might be famous as neurotransmitter goes, yet much about it remains a mystery. For example, it binds with a dozen or so different receptors, and these are found not only across many different parts of the brain, but throughout the body, with a substantial representation in the digestive tract. Depending on the type of receptor in question and its location, serotonin is liable to make very different things happen, sometimes exciting a neuron to fire, other times inhibiting it. Think of it as a kind of word, the meaning or import of which can change radically depending on the context or even its placement in a sentence. The group of tryptamines we call the classical psychedelics have a strong affinity with one particular type of serotonin receptor called the 5-HT2A. So there's a lot of antipsychotics and a lot of antidepressive medications. Any of your SSRIs, your selective serotonin receptor inhibitor medications, like your Zoloft and fluoxetine and Paxil and Prozacs, those are prescriptive medications that you're prescribed for anxiety, depression, and other kind of mood disorders sometimes. So they act on this 5-HT2A serotonin receptor, which is interesting because psychedelics are classical ones like mushrooms, DMT, I think, and psilocybin. They all affect these receptors specifically. And a lot of them are found in your digestive tract, in your stomach, in your gut brain, I call it, your second brain. The group of tryptamines we call the classical psychedelics have a strong affinity with one particular type of serotonin receptor called the 5-HT2A. These receptors are found in large numbers in the human cortex, the outermost and evolutionary most recent layer of the brain. Basically, the psychedelics resemble serotonin closely enough that they can attach themselves to this receptor site in such a way to activate it to do various things. So it kind of binds on these sites and it does curious things. And I'm just going to skip ahead because I want to get to the part where I want to share with you the diagram in this book. So basically, psychedelics binds on these receptors and it changes the way that our brain typically fires. And he talks about here, it's called the DMN, the default mode network. Default mode network. So basically, it's like if you can imagine your brain as like a lot of different highways, streets, and roads, almost like a roadmap of like a very complex city and a country. Like it's really complex. So many neurons, billions and billions, a lot of like highways, and they change all the time. It's almost like mixtures of highways and trains moving tracks in different levels. And it's like 3D and 4D, different dimensions. I just made that part up. Don't quote me. Fact check me. I just made that part up. But yeah, so typically day to day, our normal network is called the default mode network, is what is the highway patterning. And it lets us know, who we are, it gives us our identity, it gives us a sense of ethics and morality, what's right, what's wrong. And it just kind of like, it's almost like it's a very organized structure. And it's consistent, coherent, and concise, and succinct. So in this book, I'm not going to explain the diagram. It's kind of complicated, and I don't quite remember how to explain it actually. But so here it's talking about in the book an experiment that happens. Ooh, the light's weird. Let's see. How's that? Oh, it's so dark. There, much better. So it goes. So basically, it's really blurry. But anyways, it goes that. So this is basically a artsy scientific representation of the different parts of our brains. So this outer circle, in a way, is different clusters of networks in our brains, and different sizes, I believe, represent maybe different busynesses of those parts of our brains. And typically, like, there's selective parts of our brain that are known to communicate, and you can imagine these as like highways. So typically, this is like the different parts of our brain simplified, different parts of our brain, and this is how it communicates back and forth in these little specific highways. So this is placebo. So this is in the book. It's like talking about an experiment where one group of patients, one group of participants were given this placebo. So it wasn't a real drug. It was just like, it was nothing. Whereas this other group received in their pill or like whatever they took, actual psychedelics, and it was psilocybin. So that's the psychoactive component in mushrooms. So they did a brain scan. Oh yeah, sorry. So this is from a brain scan. That's how they knew which part of the brain were typically communicating and firing, from this fMRI, I believe. And here is the brain scan of a participant that took psychedelics and they were tripping out. And interestingly enough, it's way more colored in, way more highways, and different parts of the brain, way more parts of the brains are talking to each other, way more complexities. And that's why one of the effects when someone is on psychedelics, one of the effects is that it's almost like they have different senses communicating. For instance, it's almost like me touching something, and it'll trigger memories, it'll trigger smells, They'll be seeing something. It can trigger also like intense memories. If they close their eyes, if they remember something, it can trigger like intense visuals. So that's one explanation, is that it activates these natural serotonin, 5-HT2A serotonin receptors in our bodies, lots of it in our cortex, the outer layer of our brain, the latest evolutionary part of our brain. And also there's some receptors in our gut too, in our digestive system. And this unlocks our consciousness from this typical default mode network. Um, the left picture, and when you are flooded with psilocybin, LSD, DMT, different parts of your brain are communicating, and almost like it just opens up different channels, and it doesn't last. Like the experience of the drug itself, it depends what you do, but it's in the range of 6 to 12 hours. And in the book, the conclusion that Michael Pollan makes is that he did it a couple times. After about 6 months, a year, like that mystical experience and those crazy life lessons, it kind of fades a bit. But he describes his experience and what he learned from taking psychedelics is that it gave him a different ground to stand on, and he was kind of alluding that it gave him a different perspective, like a higher level that he didn't imagine before he tried psychedelics and his investigation around psychedelics in the history. So that is, oh, I'm so sorry, Charlie. That is How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. Thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. And leave us a like, leave us a comment. And we will catch you next Saturday. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.